how to work light to dark in watercolour, and how to make a tonal chart to help you achieve this. This tutorial is the winner of the poll that I started last week, and I really hope you enjoy it. And thank you everyone who voted, and also for those of you that made some brilliant suggestions. It really gives me an idea of what you guys are looking for from the channel. If you like this tutorial, don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see updates of my latest tutorials. So, shall we get started? Here is the gorgeous reference photograph. I thought this would be perfect for tonal painting, working light to dark, back to front. And for a full list of the materials I'm using and colour alternatives with the photo link, please see the description below. It's important in watercolour to work light to dark, so I've actually made up a tonal chart here, and the 3 squares at the top, which I'm actually using some tape to sort of make sure I don't paint on that area, is the white of the paper. So we work light to dark, so you want to make sure you reserve the lightest areas. You can do that by painting around the area or masking it out with masking fluid. The next tonal value is a light tone, and I'm actually using indigo paint. You could use Paynes grey or black. I've used my pipette to really water down this colour. I even feel that's a little bit dark, so I've just added some water. It does take a bit of practice, this, but it's really good exercise if you're a beginner starting out in watercolour to paint tonal charts in all different colours and then start to mix colours together as well. This is my mid-tone. It's just indigo paint, and I'm using my size 6 brush. Again, I'm going to dilute a little bit. It's quite a nice way of blending as well and creating lighter tones so you get softer edges there. A couple of good tips is use a brush about a size 6 and try to choose darker colours like an ultramarine or a black or an indigo or a sepia, because you'll get a lot more tonal values there, a lot more range. This is a mid to dark tone, and I've added a bit more paint, and you can see the jump from the mid-tone to the mid to dark tone, and you want to see that step. It's not always easy to do, that's why it needs practice. Even when I haven't done this for a while, I kind of have to keep sort of tweaking it a little bit, but you get used to the consistency of paint, and it really does help you when you're watercolour painting. Most students I've taught over the years and lots of viewers on YouTube find painting in darker tones very difficult. They always say, I can't get the dark. I think the best thing to do if you really want to get dark tones is use tube paint. Okay, and don't be afraid of the dark. I've got some quite creamy colour here. I've added some water to it. Another very good tip is you need to be able to see the light of the paper being reflected through the paint. If you can't, then your paint is too thick and creamy. As you can see there, bottom left-hand corner, you can still see the light and white of the paper on my darkest tonal value. So I really hope you found this helpful. So I'm using sepia now. Sepia is a really nice colour to use for tonal values, but also if you're doing a tonal painting, just using one colour. So again, I've skipped out the square above because that's my lightest part of the painting. This is my next lightest tone. And what I'm going to do again is I'm adding a little bit of water just to get even more light, because you can get a little sort of group of light tones, a group of mid-tones, and then the mid to dark and the darkest ones. It's very subtle. I've tried to keep it really simple, working 1 to 5, but you could actually do 1 to 10 on the little steps of tonal values, like a little ladder. However, I think for beginners, try to keep the tonal values really simple, because what happens is most people end up with lots and lots of midtones. So if you stick to these sort of 5 tonal values to begin with, the first being the white and light of the paper, and then those lightest tones, and then once that's all dry in your painting, you can start working on your mid-tone. Let that dry, and then you can work on your mid to dark tone. Let that dry, and then really, I always say to my students, darks and details right at the end. Save those darks till last, and maybe where you've got your focal point, you might want to just have some contrast there. And in landscape painting, tonal painting is brilliant because it creates depth. So those lighter tones recede back, the darker tones come forward. and immediately you create 3D in a 2D surface. So I really hope you find this. As you can see, I'm plodding along with my sepia here. I feel more confident now because I've had a little practice. Now this is a very good exercise. It's pushing the boat out a little bit. I'm working with Quinacridone Gold and sepia. You could use a little bit of raw sienna and lamp black or Paynes grey, whatever you have. I've got a real contrast here. So this is my lightest tone, and I just want to practice colour mixing. So I've just used the Quinacridone Gold on its own, but I've looked at the photograph and actually there is no white in the photograph. So I've actually made a very, very transparent layer, as you just saw at the top there. So I don't need any white, but I do want a very, very pale yellow. Now I've added some Quinacridone Gold to the sepia here for my mid-tone. So I want it to sort of step up from that lightest Quinacridone Gold there and just step up. There's actually quite a big jump there, but I'm looking at the photograph and I don't really need anything in between. If I do, I can just dilute with my brush. This is a great way of planning a painting, especially a landscape painting, and you can just use a limited palette, practice as I'm doing colour mixing and tonal values, and just working out your tones. And I'm looking at the photograph thinking, what tones do I need? So this is my mid to dark tone. I'm still using the Quinacridone Gold, but mostly now the sepia. And as you saw there, I added more sepia because I felt it wasn't dark enough. Now this is my darkest dark. I'm still using both colours though. You'll see this is actually looks darker than my dark in the middle, which was sepia on its own. So the Quinacridone Gold is enriched that sepia as well. As you notice, I always load my brush, always load that brush with paint. And I thought actually, because I'm thinking about the sky, I've added a little bit more Quinacridone Gold on the light tone there. I just wanted to sort of try things out. So it's a great way of practicing. And as you can see now, my little tonal chart has dried there, but I'm leaving it there to help me to paint this lovely sort of misty landscape scene. For those of you on the Patreon membership, a little sketch of my drawing will be available, and also this tutorial will be ad-free also. So what I've done is I've wet the paper. I'm using rough Fabriano Artistico paper, which was recommended me by one of my subscribers, so thank you for that. So I'm actually adding a very dilute Quinacridone Gold, and this is the sort of very light wash that you can see right at the top. And now I'm mixing a slightly well, it's not creamier at all, just a little bit more Quinacridone Gold. I'm mixing with my size 6 brush, but I will paint it with my size 10 brush. And I'm just painting this wet in wet. So I really want to get, if you see it, that reference photo, I want to get that sort of stronger sort of colour in the sky, but also leave some gaps. You've got that lighter wash that I've got underneath as well. So I'm just putting a little bit of this sort of stronger Quinacridone Gold just here and there, picking my spot, because I want to keep the light area as well. So always try to be aware of where your lights are and try not to paint over them. It can easily happen, so don't be too hard on yourself. So I'm going to dry my painting now and work on the next stage, and that's the mid-tones. I've got my sketchbooks there. I'm testing out some of the washes there, some of the tonal values, just to make sure that I've got them right, and I'm comparing them against my tonal chart. But sometimes you can actually use it on some paper and then just sort of show it even to your photograph is quite helpful, just to see if you've got that tonal value right. So what I'm doing there is I'm putting on this mid-tone, wet on dry with my size 6 brush, and then I'm just using water to dilute underneath, because you can see we've got in that distant sort of hills, you've got that mist underneath. So I'm actually achieving this by actually using water and just blending underneath, as you can see I'm doing now, and just getting clean water, wipe the excess on the side and almost work from the outside in rather than pulling the paint down. Otherwise you're going to bring that dark down too far, so work almost backwards. But it's a really nice thing to do. As you can see here, I'm wetting the paper first, if you find that easier, and then dropping in the paint. Above that you're going to get a hard edge, because obviously I haven't wet above there, I'm just wetting below, and then I dilute away to that light area. So you're creating tonal values on your painting. I'm still using my size 6 brush because it's quite a small area here. I don't want to lose control. I'm just again diluting the brush, working from the outside in, catching that paint and blending. As you can see, I'm working my way down the painting. I'm working back to front, or top to bottom almost, and obviously the bottom being the foreground, that's where the strongest tones are. So I'm putting mid-tones on here. I've swapped back to my size 10 brush and I'm just painting on this mid-tone, wet on dry, in between those lighter, mistier areas. I've allowed my painting to dry again because I'm going to start working on mid to dark tones, and just testing out that mid to dark tone there. I slowed that down for you a little bit. So I'm just painting this little tree in the distance here. It really stands out. I think I might have gone a little bit dark here. Again, you can actually, I'll show you how to adjust this later if that happens to you. But I'm still using the size 6 brush here, just painting on these little trees. And I'm using that diluting technique, coming up to that dark and blending it. My painting has dried again. I've given it a blow dry. I'm working on my mid to dark tones using this sepia with some quinacridone gold. And I'm using my size 6 brush, and I'm just getting some of the detail here at the top of these trees as well. So just be patient with yourself, really look at the picture. You can see how things are coming forward just by using tonal values. So I'm just sort of carrying on the same way I did before. Because of the mistiness, I'm going to use dilute. There's probably a bit too much. Didn't rinse my brush very well. And just a note actually, because my Waterpot's a little bit dirty, so I should have changed it, and that's why that wash was a bit mucky, and that's why you can get a little bit of mud as well. So I really hope that helped my little faux pas there. So I'm just working on these dark to mid tones still, giving a little bit of detail here, and you can see how that pops forward even just from that middle ground there. So again, I'm just continuing on here, working damp into damp. If you notice, I've wet underneath there with just water, and it dilutes the paint, because obviously you're not going to use just these dark mid-tones all over this area. You still need to have your lighter areas, which I'm trying to reserve. So I've blow dried my painting again. I'm working wet on dry using the dark tones now, and I'm using my size 6 brush, just getting the detail of these trees pretty much sort of not quite in the foreground, but they're just above the foreground there. I'm using the card as well just to give a little bit of texture and detail. So these trees are going to be darker in tone, but they're also going to be more detailed than the trees in the sort of middle distance there, but they're also going to be larger. So it's aerial perspective here. We've got texture, we've got dark tones, we've got larger shapes, more detail. I'm trying to think of all the different things, but it really helps create depth in a painting. I always go off subject. We're talking about tones, but I'm really trying to be bold with my tones here. But again, you don't want everything one flat tone. So I'm adding a little bit of water here just to dilute, but sort of obeying those rules of working light to dark as I come forward. So again, using the card here, it's so much fun to do using the card to create the texture. Now it's time to be brave. We're going to be painting our darkest darks. I'm using my size 10 brush. I've just pushed my palette out of the way because I'm using a side brush, dry brush technique. So I'm using the belly of the brush because I want to create a little bit of texture. So this dark tree in the corner comes forward away from that background. So don't be afraid of the dark, just go for it because it really does create depth in your painting. And it's just using the sepia and the quinacridone gold still, a creamier wash, but not too creamy that I can't see the paper being reflected through. And I'm using the same technique in the foreground, sort of grasses or a hedge. And actually I'm rolling and twiddling the brush in my hand to create texture as well. It's another way of using the belly of the brush to create texture. But if you're worried about this, you can use a sponge as well, because sometimes when you roll the brush like that, you can roll it into your lovely painting. I've diluted underneath there to create a little bit of light and then painted another bit of dark underneath. And I'm using my card to scratch out some grasses, which is fun to do. It creates texture and detail. I'm also scratching out some lights for branches in this dark tree on the right as well. It gives it a little lift so it's not so dark and flat looking. Now I've had a look at my painting and I've assessed it a little, and I feel some of the trees are a little bit dark and they're coming forward too much. So I'm lifting off with my brush, just using clean water and then dabbing out with paper towel. So make sure that water is clean and you can just lift off the paint, because watercolour isn't permanent, just to get some light back. When we don't always do things perfectly, so that's something else you can do. The only thing I will say is don't go lifting off too much because you can overwork your painting that way. I'm finishing off my painting with a spatter of the sepia and the quinacridone gold to finish off, and I've removed the washi tape now, and here is the finished painting. And I quite like the effect of the mistiness has worked quite nicely as well, but you can really see those light, mid to dark and dark tones working there. So I really hope this has been helpful and that it inspires you to maybe paint a landscape similar to this and maybe choose some different colours. If you have any questions about this tutorial, please put them in the comments section below and I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. And again, if you'd like to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And for longer, more in-depth tutorials, why not check out my Patreon membership? Thank you again for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.